These are the headlines we're following at this hour. President Yoon addresses the UN General Assembly for the second time, this time with a direct message toward Russia and North Korea over military cooperation, calling it a direct provocation not only toward Ukraine, but also the Korean Peninsula. Yoon also joined other world leaders calling for a reform of the UN Security Council, where Russia holds veto power. The U.S. vows all possible measures to block the potential transfer of North Korean weapons to Russia for its war in Ukraine. U.S. lawmakers also tabled a bill to strengthen sanctions against Pyongyang. The U.S. Federal Reserve decides to hold its key interest rate steady, but signals one more rise this year. What are the takeaways for the Bank of Korea amid the already high rate gap between the two countries? Good afternoon. We start with President Yoon's speech at the UN General Assembly. The president sent out a warning to Russia and North Korea over military cooperation. He called it a direct provocation not only toward Ukraine, but also the Korean Peninsula. Yoon also joined other world leaders calling for reform of the UN Security Council, where Russia holds veto power. Our Oh Soo-young has our top story.
President Yoon says a reform may be due for the United Nations' most powerful body on global security, expressing Seoul's firmest stance yet against Russia's potential arms cooperation with North Korea and its ongoing invasion of Ukraine. In his speech at the United Nations General Assembly on Wednesday, he reiterated that North Korea's nuclear and missile programs pose a direct and existential threat to the South and a serious challenge to global security. Following the recent summit between the North Korean and Russian leaders, Yoon said if Pyongyang acquires the information and technology needed to enhance its weapons of mass destruction in exchange for supplying Moscow with conventional weapons, this would amount to a direct provocation threatening the peace and security of both Ukraine and South Korea. He said Seoul, its allies and its partners will not stand by idly.
세계 평화의 최종적 수호자여야 할 UN 안보리 상임이사국이 다른 주권 국가를 무력 침공해 전쟁을 일으키고 전쟁 수행에 필요한 무기와 군수품을 안보리 결의를 정면으로 위반하는 정권으로부터 지원받는 현실은 자기 모순적입니다.
The Security Council's 5 permanent members include Russia and China, with both countries critically hindering collective action with their veto powers. Particularly following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, the idea of reforming the Council to expand representation of non-permanent member countries or removing the right to veto has been gaining currency, with the leaders of the United States, Japan, Ukraine and the European Union endorsing the move in their own General Assembly speeches this year.
나라마다 군사력의 크기는 다르지만 우리 모두가 굳게 연대하여 힘을 모을 때 그리고 원칙에 입각해 일관되게 행동할 때 어떠한 불법적 도발도 차단할 수 있을 것입니다.
As a non-permanent member of the United Nations for a 2-year term beginning next year, Yoon expressed his intention to take a responsible and principled role in international peace and security. He reiterated his pledge to roll out comprehensive support for Ukraine under Seoul's Ukraine Peace and Solidarity Initiative. At the G20 summit earlier this month, the leader committed over $2.3 billion in aid and assistance to Kyiv, which would include long-term low-interest loans for reconstruction projects, including infrastructure and education. Through a series of multilateral engagements, the Yoon government has been expanding the scope of Seoul's diplomacy from regional affairs concerning the Korean Peninsula to Indo-Pacific security and global governance.
국제 평화와 안전 없이 우리는 어떠한 발전과 번영도 이룰 수 없습니다.
President Yoon said going forward, world leaders share the responsibility of passing on to future generations an international order grounded in justice and the rule of law for freedom, peace and prosperity. He said South Korea, together with the UN, will readily take on this responsibility. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, New York.
This was President Yoon's second UN speech, and the president spent much of his speech on South Korea's plans to play a leading role tackling global divisions, as well as on Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. Our Kim Do-yeon has more about the speech and its significance compared to his first UN speech.
President Yoon Suk-yeol at the podium of the UN General Assembly on Wednesday said the word division 13 times during his 15-minute speech. The frequency of the use of the word highlights President Yoon's ambition to make South Korea a global contributor, which helps developing economies to close the gap with other nations.
오늘날 전례 없는 글로벌 복합 위기 속에서 안보는 물론 경제, 기술, 보건, 환경, 문화 등 모든 분야에 걸쳐 국가 간 격차가 커지고 있습니다. 이러한 격차를 줄이고 세계 모든 국가들이 상생해 나아가기 위해서는 국제사회가 강력히 연대해야 하며 유엔이 그 중심에 서야 합니다.
According to President Yoon, South Korea will tackle 3 specific divisions: infrastructure development, the impact of climate change, and digital capabilities. The developmental gap refers to countries that lack essential infrastructure for living, such as clean water and sanitation systems. To achieve this, South Korea will raise its official development assistance budget by 40% in 2024. Much of that will go into education and training to help countries build the capacity to progress socially and economically on their own. To address the climate change gap, South Korea will scale up its Green ODA to assist vulnerable countries with reducing carbon emissions and accelerating their transition to clean energy, promising $300 million to the Green Climate Fund. It's also seeking to set up the carbon-free alliance with nations that are willing to promote the adoption of carbon-free energy. For the digital divide, which President Yoon says is a major cause of economic division between nations, South Korea will actively support digital transformation for lower-income economies. In addition, it'll lead in the establishment of an international organization under the UN to discuss and set forth rules regarding digital ethics. The president wrapped up his speech with another push for Busan's World Expo 2030 bid, tying it together with the nation's motivation to step up as a globally contributing nation.
대한민국은 이제 유라시아 대륙과 태평양을 연결하는 관문인 부산에서 2030년 엑스포를 개최함으로써 글로벌 책임 국가의 역할을 적극 수행하고자 합니다.
He added that the Busan Expo will serve as a platform to spread freedom in the spirit of solidarity through which the world's citizens can overcome crises and challenges together. 1 year ago, President Yoon emphasized freedom and solidarity here at the UN. And since then, he has fostered stronger relations with like-minded nations. Now, for this year, as he commits to bridging the mentioned divisions, he has set out measures to put his vision into even more practical actions. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, New York.
As briefly mentioned in the previous report, President Yoon has proposed setting up a global alliance with countries promoting the use of carbon-free energy that ranges from wind power to nuclear power. Our Choi Soo-hyung has more about the plan and how it will benefit countries.
President Yoon Suk-yeol, in his UN speech in New York on September 20th, introduced the Carbon-Free Alliance, a global initiative promoting clean energy and reducing climate disparities between nations. According to South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, concerns have arisen over international agreements led by advanced countries such as the Renewable Energy 100% initiative. RA100 is an initiative where many of the world's biggest companies have signed up to use 100% renewable energy by 2050. It's claimed that such agreements focus solely on renewable energy, neglecting diverse energy patterns such as nuclear or hydrogen power in different regions. The ministry says some companies in countries like South Korea with limited renewable energy sources see this as a trade barrier due to higher costs. Expanding carbon-free energy like nuclear power and hydrogen globally is challenging with only private efforts, as countries having varying systems and standards. President Yoon stated that the Carbon-Free Alliance will be an open platform where businesses, governments, and international organizations from around the world can participate, aiming to address these challenges.
대한민국은 탄소 중립 목표 달성을 앞당기기 위한 현실적인 대안으로 재생 에너지뿐만 아니라 원전, 수소와 같은 고효율 무탄소 에너지를 폭넓게 활용할 것이며 이를 기후위기 취약국들과 공유함으로써 그들에게 이 혜택이 돌아가게 할 것입니다.
President Yoon's carbon-free energy proposal focuses on setting minimum emission standards for greenhouse gases and electricity production and using all kinds of carbon-free energy sources instead of only endorsing certain energy sources. The ministry added that the missions of the CEF Alliance include offering technical consulting for private sector innovation, establishing global standards for efficient carbon-free energy supply chains, providing a specialized workforce, and giving support to reduce climate disparities between advanced and developing nations. South Korea plans to collaborate with countries such as the US, Japan, France, and the UK, sharing similar industrial structures to promote the global shift to carbon-free energy. The South Korean government is committed to actively supporting a worldwide CEF alliance and boosting Korea's competitiveness in this sector. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Yoon continues his sideline meetings to rally support for Busan's World Expo bid while seeking to bolster bilateral cooperation. Among the meetings was one with the leader of Switzerland, where the president celebrated the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations between the two countries. Yoon also discussed development cooperation in fields like healthcare and agriculture with the Central African Republic and Kyrgyzstan. In addition, President Yoon discussed Israel's Prime Minister expanding their partnership in advanced technologies and talked with Hungary's president about high-tech industries and addressing low birth rates. The U.S. has vowed all possible measures to block the potential transfer of North Korean weapons to Russia for its war in Ukraine. U.S. lawmakers also introduced a bill calling for more sanctions against Pyongyang. Bae Eun-ji has more.
Following a rare summit between the leaders of North Korea and Russia, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington is monitoring the situation and taking action to try to disrupt any potential arms deal. Blinken said the U.S. is trying to break that up wherever we can. Speaking in an interview with broadcaster NBC on Wednesday local time, the top diplomat added that the summit between Pyongyang and Moscow last week showed a certain amount of desperation from Russia due to the prolonged war in Ukraine. He also said Russia is in a much worse position than it was before it engaged in its horrific war against Ukraine, militarily, economically, and diplomatically. Noting that Putin did not attend either the UN General Assembly in New York or the recent G20 summit, Blinken said the only thing Russia has left is to go to regimes such as North Korea and Iran to try to get what it needs. Separately, 2 U.S. lawmakers have introduced a bill calling for the expansion of sanctions on any activity related to the North's support for Russia's war in Ukraine. Representatives Gary Connolly and Joe Wilson, co-chairs of the Congressional Caucus on Korea, tabled the bill to provide for the imposition of sanctions with respect to North Korea's support for Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. The bill calls for the U.S. president to impose sanctions on any foreign person that is responsible or facilitates the transfer or sale of arms from North Korea to be used in Russia's war in Ukraine, as well as any foreign financial institution that provides financial services for this person. The move comes after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited Russia last week and held a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, sparking concerns about a potential arms deal, which South Korean and U.S. officials have warned would be a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has accepted Chinese President Xi Jinping's invitation to visit Beijing in October for the 3rd Belt and Road Forum. Putin made the statement on Wednesday in televised remarks to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi during his 4-day visit to Russia for the latest in a series of high-level talks between Moscow and Beijing. The meeting will be their first since March when they sat down in Moscow to showcase a united front against Western countries. China and Russia describe each other as strategic allies, with both countries frequently touting their no-limits partnership and economic and military cooperation. The U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to hold its key interest rate steady, but has hinted at least one more rise this year. With that in mind, the Bank of Korea will be making its own decision next month amid the already high rate gap between the two countries. Our Park Gun-woo explains.
The interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. remains unchanged following the U.S. Fed's latest decision to freeze interest rates for the second time this year. After a 2-day Federal Open Market Committee meeting, the U.S. Fed on Wednesday decided to freeze its key interest rates in the 5.25% to 5.5% range. South Korea's central bank kept its rate at 3.5% in August, meaning the gap between the two countries will stay in the 1.75 to 2 percentage points range, at least until authorities make their next announcement on interest rates on October 19th. Speaking at a press conference, Fed Chair Jerome Powell said the latest decision to freeze rates is in line with its goals of achieving maximum employment and dampening inflation to 2% over the long run. And he hinted at the likelihood of additional rate hikes down the road. South Korea's Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho in a meeting on Thursday focused on Mr. Powell's remarks about the possibility of interest hikes.
Following the Fed's decision, it seems that there is a high possibility that high interest rates will remain longer, along with increased volatility in the global financial markets. The government and Bank of Korea will be on high alert to address the situation.
The Bank of Korea also said future rate hikes by the Fed are possible. The Bank of Korea's Vice President Yoo Sang-dae said the bank will monitor how these monetary policies will affect the financial market for both Korea and globally. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
The number of deaths in South Korea increased by 17.6% on-year in 2022, with cancer being among the major causes. According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, the country reported 373,000 deaths last year, with cancer, heart disease, and COVID-19 behind 39.8% of total deaths. People aged 80 and older accounted for almost 54% of total deaths, a 17% increase compared to a decade ago. The number of deaths in South Korea has been on an upward trend since 2009. Samsung Electronics has tied with Apple for the best consumer experience for personal computers among U.S. consumers. In a recent survey released by the American Consumer Satisfaction Index, Samsung and Apple both clinched the #1 spot with a score of 83 out of 100 in the PCs category. This is the first time in 20 years that Apple had to share the top spot in this category. Samsung, which was ranked second in the previous year with 81 points, so its score rise by 2 points. The ACSI said the jump was mostly down to higher consumer satisfaction for Samsung's Galaxy Tab. All 7 members of the BTS have agreed to renew their contracts with their agency, Big Hit Music. The announcement was made by the agency's parent company, Hybe Corporation, on Wednesday. The members will renew their contracts for the second time separately, as J-Hope and Jin are currently serving their mandatory military service, with Suga set to join them on Friday. The agency added that by the time the new exclusive contract period begins in 2025, members currently enlisted in the military will have completed their service, ensuring the group's continuity beyond that time.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. At the United Nations Security Council, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for Russia to be stripped of its veto power. Speaking on Wednesday with Russia's UN ambassador present, Zelensky said that it was impossible to stop the war in Ukraine due to Moscow's abuse of its veto power. The 15-member Security Council is meant to ensure international peace and security. But it cannot take any action on any measure that gets vetoed by one of the 5 permanent members, which includes Russia. Zelensky suggested changing the rules to allow the UN General Assembly to override any Security Council vetoes. The Ukrainian leader's appeal for reform echoes calls by countries in the global south who are also unhappy with the Security Council structure. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has announced a delay to a number of key policies meant to tackle climate change. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday, the delays include pushing back a ban on selling new petrol and diesel cars from 2030 to 2035, a slowdown on phasing out gas boilers, and that homeowners will not be forced to improve insulation to improve energy efficiency. The PM reasoned that the delays would help ease the unacceptable costs of energy transition for British households. He also repeated his plans to expand oil and gas drilling in the North Sea. The moves have been met with a backlash from some businesses that have invested in EV projects in the country, as well as from environmental groups. Sunak said the UK is still committed to going net zero by 2050. Iran's parliament has adopted a new law that toughens penalties for women not following the Islamic dress code. If the law gets final approval from the Guardian Council, it will be implemented for a trial period of 3 years. Under the changes, women not wearing headscarves or long, loose-fitting clothing could face up to 10 years in prison. The bill also punishes businesses serving women not wearing a headscarf properly and those who protest it. A growing number of women in Iran have stopped covering their hair recently. This follows nationwide protests a year ago over the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She died in the custody of Iran's morality police last year after being arrested for allegedly not wearing her hijab correctly. And finally, researchers have discovered what may well be the oldest man-made wooden structure dating back almost 500,000 years. According to a study published in the journal Nature on Wednesday, the structure is composed of overlapping logs attached together with a notch. The structure was unearthed in 2019 in a riverbed in Zambia, near its border with Tanzania. A few wooden tools were also discovered. It's believed that the structure was used as the base for a walkway or a platform. Its age means that it could have even been made by an extinct species of humans. The find could also mean that Stone Age humans stayed at the site for an extended period or made frequent return visits. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It rained nationwide yesterday, quite heavily for autumn rain. Southern parts of the country are still seeing showers today, and many southeastern regions will see 5 to 30 millimeters of rainfall through tonight, while Jeju Island could see rain into tomorrow morning. The upper regions will be under partly sunny skies today. Afternoon highs are similar to yesterday for the capital, but rain-affected regions are having cooler daytime highs, so dress a bit warmer than yesterday. Strong winds are dragging down the feels-like temperatures, with a strong wind advisory issued on Jeju and the southeast coast. Seoul and Gwangju will be going up to 24 degrees Celsius. Daejeon and Daegu topping out at 23 degrees this afternoon. It will be a breezier morning tomorrow, going down to 16 degrees in the capital, perhaps lower in other parts of the country. So temperature gaps will get wider. Take good care of yourselves to avoid catching a cold. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
During his 15-minute UN speech, President Yoon mentioned his country, the Republic of Korea, some 20 times, the most of any word or phrase. That as the president shares South Korea's vision to play a leading role in tackling global challenges. Last year, in his first UN speech, he mentioned freedom the most, in calling for solidarity among countries that share freedom as a universal value. The second most mentioned in this year's speech was digital, followed by Expo, a word that had not appeared in his first speech. Yoon mentioned Expo 14 times, allocating 15% of his entire speech to that subject, certainly giving a high-stakes push for Busan's 2030 World Expo bid in a rare chance to address all voting members at once before November's vote. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.